I'm very happy to welcome to the podium our main speaker this evening, Mike from Prescott. My brain was going, Mike. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it.
My name is Mike Bennett, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Melissa, for doing such a great job. I was really impressed when you were reading the format, and you weren't even reading. It's like you just knew the format.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, this meeting, some of you, Larry, right? Yeah, some of you have been around a long time. This meeting was founded by, this group was founded by a very good friend of mine, Frank Hanna, who died many years ago. And he was a Pacific group member over in California, and he moved here to retire. He's kind of semi-retired, and he started this group with a similar format to that. And in Prescott, we have a group called the Rarely Group that's also off of a similar format from the Pacific group. So these are shoot-offs of that meeting. Anyways, I'm glad to see it's still alive and going well. And I want to welcome our past delegate who I just met and was having a nice conversation with. If you know what that means, well, ask people and get involved in service a little bit and you find out. So anyways, I grew up down in Phoenix on Van Buren Street between the freeway and 35th Avenue. So I was down in that corner around Durango, which was convenient because I spent some time there. Yeah. And I was in and out of the foster care system and didn't really have any stability in my life. And I'm going to say somewhere around 9 or 10 years old, I finally got in a position where I could wander around unsupervised. And when that happens, you know, it's pretty easy to run across something. And I did. And funny thing is, I always felt like I didn't fit in, like I was just a little bit off. And everybody else, or most everybody else, some other kids looked like they were off too, but most everybody else looked like they kind of had a handle on things and that they had kind of a normal, stable existence. But I just didn't feel that way. And my brother and I went from place to place to place and getting locked up, and he went to the boys' ranch a couple of times. I didn't get in too much trouble. I was just in and out of the juvenile detention center. And but about 12 years old, these people took me in who were neighbors to me, and they moved me up near Prescott onto a ranch. So I went from the South Phoenix on the streets. I went to this ranch, and it was quite a culture shock for me. Although I did enjoy the wholesomeness of being out in the country and doing that kind of thing. And all the people were very nice, and they were polite, and they said yes sir and no sir and yes ma'am and yes sir, and it was quite an interesting transition for me. And I look back on it now, and I'm convinced, and I think this is true for most people, I'm absolutely convinced that I was a kind person deep down. But because of the environment I was in, I was almost forced to act like I was a tough guy, just to survive. And I remember I was on the playground one day, and this kid was chasing me, and obviously I was running. And he caught me. And he's on, and all the kids rush over, you know, to see the whooping. He's on top of me, and I'm kind of covered up, and he's beating on me, and I'm thinking to myself the embarrassment of, you know, being in that position and running and being a coward and him being. And as I'm thinking that, I come to the conclusion that this guy's not hurting me. You know, I mean, he's kind of hitting on me and stuff, but it's not like he's really hurting me. And I think, Jesus, I'd rather take a beating than to run anymore. And that's kind of what happened to me after that. The next time somebody came after me, I just didn't run. I just stayed and I stood my ground. And I've often said that I've taken more ass whoopings than anybody I've ever known. Yeah. But most people regretted doing it. That was my only goal, is just to have you leave thinking, Jesus, I wish I would have lifted that little something below. And so anyways, but I just didn't fit in. Just nothing seemed to be right in my life. And then when I drank, and it didn't happen the first time I drank. I was pretty young the first couple times I drank, but there was sometime around my early teens that when I drank, everything changed. Everything became absolutely perfect. No longer did I have to measure up to you. After about halfway through my second drink, you had to measure up to me. I want to welcome everybody who is here, our visitors from Carlsbad. We talked for a little bit, and most of the Prescott area, Dewey, Gino, and stuff. We have a very active group down there, so when somebody goes somewhere, we all kind of go together, and we do this somewhat often, every month or two. But anyways, so I took a couple of drinks, and everything became okay with me. And so the interesting thing about that, and non-alcoholics don't understand it, if you have emotional turmoil and everything's going bad and you drink it, it makes it better. Well, why doesn't everybody do that? Well, hell, why doesn't everybody drink? Well, everybody does drink. The truth is, only about 6 or 7% of the population, when they drink, have the reaction we have. Most people, they drink and nothing changes. They get a little tipsy, get a little silly. Sometimes they drink too much and get a hangover and they decide they're not going to do that anymore. But their perception of reality doesn't change. And that's the thing that's interesting about alcoholism. When I drank, it instantly changed my perception of reality. Everything became okay no matter how bad it was. And this went on for years. After a while, my first wife, I got married pretty young, my first wife, when she got pregnant, she decided I needed to quit drinking because she could not see us raising a child living like I was living, because I was just drunk all the time and I was violent. I was always fighting. I wasn't violent towards her, like I wasn't a wife beater. Although no, I've known many wife beaters in AA who, after they got sober and they started taking the steps and they applied those principles, they quit being wife beaters, and they talk about it as part of their story. Help other people to do that, to realize you can change and it can be better. I wasn't one of those guys, but I was a door slamming son of a bitch. I mean, I'd slam doors so hard they'd just bust right off the hinges, and I'd throw coffee cups when I'd get mad. I was horrible about throwing coffee cups across the house. So, I kind of brutalized her emotionally, even though I wasn't a wife beater. And but she wanted me to quit drinking, and I didn't want to be divorced and left out on the street. So I tried it. I thought maybe they were right. Drinking was my problem, because that's what they tell me. If you quit drinking, your life will get better. So I quit drinking, and I do okay for a while, because like Chris was saying, and great talk, Chris. Thank you very much for leading. So like he was saying, I would get up in the morning in the later years and I'd just throw up every day. I just couldn't keep anything down, and I'd wake up shaking, and I'd have to pour a little brandy in my coffee, and I'd have to kind of choke that down, which was not easy. But once I got it down, everything would start settling down, and then I could take a shower, get dressed, and go to work. And so it looked like they were right. They said, drinking is your problem. If you stop drinking, your life will get better. So I tried it, and I tried it sincerely. And in the beginning, I did get better. I quit throwing up. I started to take a shower, started sleeping. I was eating good, going to work. But here's what happens to me when I'm sober. After a while, gradually, I'd start to get a little bit irritable. And then after some time, I'd start acting angry again. Then the next thing you know, I'm slamming doors. And then I'm so pissed off, I can't stand anybody in the world. I just hate being sober so bad that it would become necessary for me to drink again. And when I drank, I felt better. So I know they thought drinking was my problem, and they told me drinking was my problem, and I tried to believe that drinking was my problem, but after I tried it, I realized they were wrong. And I believe that still today. Drinking was never my problem. Drinking was my solution. Drinking was the only thing that I'd ever found to relieve the pressure, to take the pressure of my existence and make it okay. But after a while, I kept drinking and kept drinking and kept drinking, and it became necessary to stop again for wife number 2. When wives get pregnant, it turns out, that's a bad situation for a drunk. So I tried quitting again. And it was the same thing. I stayed sober I think the first time I stayed sober for somewhere near a year. And then I just couldn't take it anymore. I was at this fireman's ball, and we were down here, the family's down on this end, and we were dancing, and they were having a few drinks, but mostly Cokes and stuff, and we'd dance a little bit. But I could see over in that corner, it was dark, and the bar was over there, and the lights were over there, and you could hear the noise, and you could hear the laughter, and the glasses clinking together. And Bill Wilson kind of told a story like that, when he was in that hotel in Akron. And so somehow I drifted over there. Next thing you know, 10 of us are out in the parking lot, and we have this Volkswagen upside down. We're spinning it like a top. Those kind of things happen when I start. Anyways, But wife number two, she was having trouble with my drinking too, and she told me drinking was my problem, and I had to stop, and her parents told me that. So I tried it again because, drinking had become an issue again. I'd get to where, funny thing is, after a while, I got to where once I started drinking, I couldn't stop. And that's the line they talk about. Some people misunderstand some of the things in the big book. They say we crossed this line, and where we could no longer control our alcohol. And people think that we crossed this line into becoming an alcoholic. We drank so much that finally we became an alcoholic. And that's never been true for any of us. I didn't drink and then become alcoholic. When I drank, it instantly changed my perception of reality, which meant immediately that I was an alcoholic. And because of that, I drank until it ruined my life. So I tried to stop again, and next time I couldn't even last anywhere like a year, maybe 6 months or 7 months, and then I just had to drink again. And the last time I quit drinking, I made it 4 months, and I just couldn't stand it again. I quit drinking forever, for the third time. I'm never going to drink again. And I made it 4 months, and I was so miserable, but I wasn't willing to drink anymore. I just wasn't willing to drink because I finally came to the conclusion that once I start drinking, I can't stop. And there's no telling what's going to happen. I love people who say, I know what's going to happen. If I start drinking, I know exactly what will happen. I promise you this, if I start drinking, you do not know what's going to happen. I don't have any idea what's going to happen. Now, I'm a traveler, so a pretty good chance I'm going to take a trip because I do like it. And it never occurred to me once. You talked about, whether you should have been driving or not. Never once did it ever occur to me not to drive my truck when I was drinking. I just never thought that was even an option. I drove my truck when I wanted to drive my truck. It didn't matter. So I never even once considered not driving. Anyway, so I was 4 months sober, and I was so miserable. I just didn't know what to do. And it occurred to me, I was thinking to myself, I was living in a barn, and so things were going well. But I was sitting on the step, and I'm thinking to myself, we got just a little bit of money, because I'm still married to this woman. We got just a little bit of money. We got 2 cars. And I thought I was doing well because I had 2 cars paid for. Looking back on them, they're pretty shitty cars, but I had 2 cars. So I thought I could take 1 car and half the money, and I could go somewhere, and I could just sell the car and then live on the street. Warm climate, find a nice place to go. I could just live on the street and I drink. But as I walked through that whole story, I got to the point where, okay, so I'll sell the car and I'll take that little bit of money I have and the money that I have already and I'll just drink and I'll find ways to eat and stuff. But what happens when I run out of money? Well, I'm going to have to get a job. And I'm going to have to build up some money so I can keep doing that. And then if I'm going to have to do all that shit, well, I'm already there. I'm already where I would be if I did all of that. So I didn't know what to do. It's just hopeless for me. So it occurred to me, why don't you call Alcoholics Anonymous? Now, I only had 2 examples of Alcoholics Anonymous ever in my life. One of them was my cousin. And my cousin was in and out of AA until he got up into his late 60s, maybe early 70s, and then he died from alcoholism. He just drank himself to, liver shut down and everything started shutting down and he died. So that was not a very good example of this working for me, but it was an example. And I did happen to have a big book because one day I was packing him up so we could go on a drinking binge. And we're in his bedroom, and I'm trying to get him packed quick because his wife's in the kitchen pissed off, because she's always pissed off when I showed up because she knew her husband was leaving with me. And he was a funny guy. When he would get into AA, he would become a religious fanatic. So I'd have to stay completely away from him because I just didn't believe in God. I thought that was a bunch of Girl Scout crap, just fairy tale shit. And but then when he'd start drinking again, he was just a good old boy, and him and I could run around and we could do whatever. And then he'd get sober and he'd become religious, and then he'd get drunk, and this just went on for years. But this time he happened to be drinking, so I went by to get him so he could go with me, and we were on our way to the Grand Canyon. And as he's packing, he picks this big book up that's sitting on his nightstand. He opens it, and he's flipping through it a little bit. And he looks right at me, and he said, "I don't need this, but you do." So I said, whatever. I took the book and packed before she kills both of us, So we got in the car, and I threw it under my seat. Now, I don't know how many cars I changed between that time and the years later when I finally went to AA, but I still had that book. Every car I changed, for some reason, that book kept going with me. And the only other example was a friend of mine that I drank with for many years, and he was like a best friend type of friend. Our kids played together, our wives played together, and him and I played together. And he'd been to a couple treatment centers in and out of AA, and then he hung himself. And when he hung himself, that's when I was 4 months sober at that time when I got the news. That's when I thought maybe I should go to AA. Now, I don't know why in the hell a guy, reasonable person, would say, well, I got this example, which is AA failure, if you're an outsider looking in. Then I got this example, AA failure, because this guy hung himself, he's dead. I didn't know any good examples of Alcoholics Anonymous, but for some reason I was sitting there, 4 months sober, and I thought maybe I should call AA. So I got in the phone book and I flipped around, because my sobriety date is January 26, 1992. So I celebrated last January 31 years. So I've been sober a long time. You can clap for that. I say that. Well, Rich didn't clap. You should clap for that. Yeah, okay. I say that. It's okay to clap for that because it's a big deal. And people need to know that people can stay sober, and they can stay sober long term. It's an example we need to set. I'm so glad you got up and took your 22-year chip, because people need to see that. And Brady's 3-year chip. Brady left. He left a water bottle. So I'm just going to talk to the water bottle. No, I see you back there. Anyways, so I called Alcoholics Anonymous, and this lady answered the phone, and I said, can I go to a meeting? I'd never been to a meeting. I didn't know anything about it, but I said, I'd like to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. She said, oh, well, there's one tonight. And it was in a clubhouse similar to this. And so we were talking on when we were pulling in here, how sweet it is to come to a clubhouse, because many of us have a really sweet spot in our heart for them, because that's how we got sober, was in clubhouses. And then we started going to churches and other things after that for meetings, but we started there. And so anyways, she answered the phone, and she said, there's a meeting tonight down at the clubhouse. And I said, okay. And 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, or I think all the meetings back then were about 8 o'clock. So I said, okay. Well, she gave me the directions. And we were just in that club a few weeks ago. It was up in Washington State. We were up there to convention together, and we went in that club, went to a meeting. But I remember I hung the phone up, and I turned around, and there was my wife looking at me. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to go to an AA meeting. And she said, why? Normal people, you're 4 months sober, you don't think about it. And I said, I don't know. But that's the best answer I come up with. So I just left, and I went and got in the truck, and I drove over there, and I snuck in with some people, because I didn't want anybody to think I was new. And anyways, I went to meetings for a little while. And I remember sitting in there thinking, people are talking, and I'm not identifying. I'm not, it's Bill and Bob, they were that example of one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic in an effort to reduce their feelings of difference just enough that they might take an action they don't yet believe will work. Well, I'm sitting in these first couple of meetings, and I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing anything like that. I'm not identifying with anybody, and I'm hearing some drunk logs and stuff, but nothing that I'm identifying. And then this man, my third meeting, this man said, if drinking is your problem, stop drinking, and your life should get better. But if you stop drinking and your life gets worse, maybe we can help you. And it was like a banana fell out of my ear. For the first time, I heard somebody say something that made me think, maybe this man understands how I feel, because that's what I've been trying to tell everybody. Drinking is not my problem, it's my solution. When I stop drinking, my life becomes completely unmanageable emotionally. After a while, my emotions are so bad I just can't take it. So anyways, he volunteered to be my sponsor after that meeting, because I was trying to escape, and he chased me out to my car. And he said, do you have a sponsor? And I said, no. He said, well, I'm going to be your sponsor. I didn't even know what a sponsor was. He said, I'm going to be your sponsor, but there's some things you're going to have to do. And I said, like what? He said, do you have a big book? And I said, I do, actually. I'd never opened it, but I had it. He said, well, I want you to start reading the book. He gave me instructions what to read. And he said, I want you to call me every day. And he gave me his phone number. He said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And if I have to, for this to work for me, this will not work for me. And he said, are you willing to believe in God if I can prove it to you? And I said, yes, but you won't. And he said, that's good enough. All you need is a willingness, and we can work from there. He got very excited that I had this willingness, and I thought it was just crap, I thought it was goofy. And but he was such a good sponsor that he didn't bother me about it too much. When we got to the third step, he asked me to kneel down on the floor with him and hold his hands and say the third step prayer with him. And it pissed me off so bad. I can just see my head turning red and the veins popping out. I mean, that's the way I felt. I was just so angry. And he said, well, you agreed to follow directions. Because he had asked me, can you follow directions? And I lied and said yes. And so he said, you'd agreed to follow directions. And I said, I don't give a shit what I agreed to. I'm not doing it. And he said, will you at least read the prayer out of the book? And I said, all right. I was cornered, He kind of caught me off guard, so I said, all right, I'll read it. So then I just read it. And to this day, it's funny, I saw it up here, the third step prayer up here on the wall. To this day, when a meeting ends and they say the third step prayer, I don't have all the words memorized, and I've been sober a long time. Because it's almost like I almost refuse to learn that prayer. Isn't that funny? And I recognized that a few years ago, and I thought, well, that's silly. You're sober a long time now, you ought to learn it. Now it's just too funny for me to learn, so I'm just not going to learn that prayer. Maybe when I'm 41 years sober, I might. But anyways, so I read the prayer, and when I was done, I slammed that book shut, and I said, there, it didn't do a damn thing for me. And he was such a good AA, such a good sponsor. He said, let's move on. He didn't try to convince me, like so many people do in AA, that you must have a connection with God in order to stay sober. You must have a connection with God before you can move forward. He wasn't one of those people. He said, let's move on. And we wrote an inventory. And I shared that inventory with him a week or two later. And I remember driving home. I had about a 45-minute drive home. And I was driving home after sharing that inventory. And I had this experience that for many, many years, I called a major spiritual experience like Bill Wilson described. Turns out now, after many spiritual experiences and many years and looking back on it, the only thing that happened was I felt good. Isn't that funny? That just sounds so simple. But I don't think all of my life I had ever really felt good about me. I tried to look good. I just don't think I ever really felt good. And after unburdening myself of the secrets that I was carrying around and finding out that they were really not such a big deal, and all of the lying and all the cheating and all the stuff, I just finally told somebody the truth. I just finally accepted what I really was, what I thought I really was. And I was driving home and I felt so good that it occurred to me, what if they're right? Because if for me to feel this good, maybe they're right. Maybe there is a God that loves me. Now that ain't much, but I'm going to tell you, for a guy like me, that was something. That was the most, I rode on that for days and days and days. It was such a high. I went through my 6th and 7th step with him, and then we wrote this list of people I owed amends to, and immediately he had me, welcome, glad you're here. I'm going to start over because she just got here. Yeah, I'm just kidding. But anyways, and he had me immediately start going out and cleaning up the mess I'd made, start approaching people. And I just kept feeling better and better, because the more I did, the better I felt. And the better I felt, the more I wanted to do. So him and I really became very close, and he helped walk me through this thing. And before you know it, I just feel wonderful. And when I was 2 years sober, I'd moved up to Washington because I owed a bunch of alimony and child support, and I thought if I skipped town, I wouldn't have to pay it, which was true until I got in AA. Then it turns out, when you start doing this work, you got to go back and pay all that. So, I spent 2 years up there until I got caught up and everything, and then I moved back to Arizona because I had a daughter here. And he wanted me, and I thought it was a good idea too, to come down here and be present in her life. I was current. I was calling her every week on the phone. When she would have a birthday, I'd send presents. Her mother was wonderful. She'd wait till I called for her to open the presents so we could be on the phone together. And I'd bring her for the summer. And I was the best long-distance dad once I got sober that anybody could be. But it wasn't enough, and there was no reason I couldn't be here and be in her life. So I moved back home, and my wife at that time, that was wife number 2, I was about 3 or 4. I got down here and I got very, very active, like I am now. I'm very active now, and I was very active then. And I had a sponsor that was very active down here, and Clancy was his sponsor from the Pacific group, so I was in that lineage of sponsorship. And they really made sure, they push you, those guys, to stay active and stay sponsoring people and have commitments. And I was very active in service for about 10 years. But anyways, this wife, after about 3 or 4 years of being down here, maybe 5 years of being down here, I was sponsoring this guy, and we were always doing stuff on the weekends, barbecues or whatever. And I had invited this new man that I was sponsoring to come to my house for this barbecue. And my wife that time had joined Alano, and she had been in Alano a few years and very active. Well, they hit it off to the point that they started having an affair sometime later. And after a while, I quit sponsoring him. Anyways, that really disturbed me because it made me think to myself, how can you be as good as I'm trying to be? I'm a good husband. I'm a good employee. I'm a good brother and son. I'm good in AA. I'm sponsoring people. I've got service commitments. I'm doing all the right stuff that you guys have taught me to do. And then how can something like this happen? How unfair is it? And that isn't the worst part. The AAs and Al-Anons had fallen in love with my second wife. So when her and I eventually divorced, and a year or two later, I started dating the woman that I'm married to now. We've been married 23 years, coming up on 24. So that woman, they were mean to her. In AA, they just weren't treating her right. It's like they were kind of upset because I had a new woman. And I tried to remind them, in my mind, she cheated on me. It wasn't like I did anything wrong, But so it made me very uncomfortable, and I started building a little bit of a resentment towards AA. I didn't realize I was doing that, but I did. And then the people I was sponsoring, they were just lousy people to sponsor. They wouldn't show up when they said, they wouldn't call when they said, they wouldn't do the shit they said. Nobody was doing anything. So the next few years just kind of built up to where I was still active on the surface, and you wouldn't look at me and know, but inside, I was sober years and years before I could look back and see the truth about this, but I was starting to get so resentful towards AA. And then my job ended, and I had a big job. I was making a lot of money, and it ended, and I found a job in Alabama. So I had to relocate. And my sponsor said, when you get there, get involved, get meetings and stuff. And I said, oh yeah, I will, So I got to Alabama though, and I didn't realize this resentment had festered up so much that I got there. Many of us were talking about this, making these moves. I got there and I didn't connect right away. I went to meetings because my first sponsor was sponsoring me again. The other sponsor had died, that Clancy was sponsoring, so my first sponsor was sponsoring me again. And I went to just enough meetings where I could lie to him and tell him I was active in AA. But I didn't join a group. I didn't get any service commitments. I didn't get any new people to sponsor when I got there. I was still getting calls from people I was sponsoring in Arizona, and I was still fielding those calls and, being a good AA over the phone. But I'd go to meetings sporadically over this large city, and it's 400,000 population where I was. So you go to a lot of meetings and not ever see the same person twice, and that's kind of what I was doing. And I'd get there just as the meeting started, and man, I was gone as soon as that prayer was over. So I didn't stop and talk to anybody. And then meetings got more and more sporadic. And after about a year, a depression had set in on me that I couldn't hardly describe. And it kept going and kept going, and then I started having suicidal thoughts. Now I'm 14 years sober. I'm having these suicidal thoughts, and I can't shake them. And the only thing that kept me from, I think, doing it was I kept thinking about I couldn't leave that legacy to my family. I couldn't have my wife and my children and my grandchildren be those people who their granddaddy killed himself. I just couldn't do it. So I was trying to figure out how I could make it look like an accident so it wouldn't look like I was such a shit, And this went on for some time, and then finally Mickey, my first sponsor, died. So now I had nobody to be accountable with. I wasn't connected to AA, and I was thinking this way. So I broke down and called my wife, because I was working out of town at the time. Called my wife, and I told her what was going on. She was absolutely devastated. She had no idea, because I'd always been so strong. She had no idea that I was even capable of something like that, those kind of thoughts. And she just broke down and started crying, and then I started crying, and the whole thing was a mess. But after a while, everybody kind of settled down and regained their composure, and she said magic words to me. She said, why don't you get a sponsor and start going back to AA like you used to when you were happy? And I thought, shit. I'm traveling for work. I'm not any one place like home group type of have a local sponsor. So the only person I could think of calling was Clancy, and some of you know who Clancy was, many of you don't. But I called Clancy. I'd known him all my sobriety, and I called Clancy, and I said, Clancy, this is Mike Bennett. He said, hello, Michael, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a long time. And I said, well, I'm not doing well. And I told him that story as condensed as I had to, because he won't stay on the phone with you very long. I condensed it down as much as I could. And he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to send me a letter. Tell me everything that's happened to you since I saw you last. That'd been about 7 years since I'd seen him. So I want a letter with everything's happened. So I sent him that letter, and I told him that whole story. And he said, but while I had him on the phone, he said, send me a letter. But he said, right now I want you to go to a meeting today, and I want you to tell them what you did. And it was like he was scolding me. You go to a meeting and you tell them what you did. And I want you to go to a meeting every day, and you call me Thursday at 2 o'clock. And I want that letter by Monday every week. And I said, yes, sir. And I allowed that man to superimpose his opinion into my life, into my actions. And I went to that meeting that night. I was up in Iowa, and I went to a meeting, and it was a little room, maybe about a dozen people around there. And he got to me to talk, because they were just all going around the room. And I told him what I did. I just told him that story I told you, condensed in just a few minutes. And after the meeting, this guy named Pierre came up to me, and he said, God, I'm so glad you were at the meeting. He said, I'm sober 3 years, but I had 14 years sober, and I had a very similar thing happen to me, but I got drunk. And I stayed drunk for several years, and now I'm back, and I've been sober 3 years. He said, do you know your way around? I said, no, I'm up here working. I'm going to be here a few months, and I don't know any place. Pierre would come to the place where I was working. He'd pick me up every night, and he'd take me to a meeting. And every weekend when I was off, he'd take me to, like a potluck or a eating meeting or something. We did something every day. And Pierre was my angel. He was my AA savior. And I kept calling Clancy. And then I finally wound up moving down to South Alabama, and I stayed there and lived there and then traveled from there. And I joined a group down there, and I got active. I got a service commitment. I got 5 minutes left. That's not fair. He talked too long.
I know. Sorry.
No, I'm just joking. I can wrap it up in 12 minutes or so. Anyways, so I remember I was sitting there. I was about a year back involved. I'm about 15 years sober, and I'm doing all the stuff he's telling me to do, but I don't feel connected. I don't feel a part of AA. I just feel like a phony. And I remember telling Clancy one time, I called him and I said, Clancy, I sit in meetings, and I say things I used to believe, but I don't really feel them anymore. I don't believe them anymore. He said, I don't give a damn what you believe. You sit in meetings and you tell people what you used to believe, and you set a good example. God damn it. And he hung up on me. And he hung up the phone. And I thought, you son of a bitch. Well, I went to meetings and I said what I used to believe. And I kept doing it. One day I'm at the coffee pot, feeling like the meeting was horrible. We were in the clubhouse, and this guy's sharing, and it's just terrible. Just everybody's terrible. And then this newcomer who's a habitual slipper, been in and out of AA forever. But this time it's different. This time it's going to. And I'm thinking, when will somebody tell somebody to shut up? That's all I'm thinking. Because I'm spiritual. Anyways, nobody had seen it because I was smiling. I was just sitting there like I enjoyed the meeting. But I'm at the coffee pot after the meeting. And he comes up to me, and he's just yapping, and he just won't shut up. And I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, get away from me, and just won't. And finally I turned to him, and I said, here's what I think I said. I said, do you have a sponsor? Because I'm tired of listening to you. That's what I'm feeling, But probably what I said, I was probably very kind and very polite. And I said, do you have a sponsor? And he said no. And I said, well, why don't you go get a book off shelf? Because our club had a bookshelf, with books you could. So I said, go get a book and go sit out on that patio. I'm going to get my coffee, and I'll meet you out there, and we'll talk about stuff. I spent about 2 hours with that man, and we left with him having the instructions for writing his inventory. And I told him, I'm going to be back next weekend. I want you to call me every day, and we're going to do your 5th step when I get back. I had about a 20-minute drive home. As I'm driving home, that feeling hit me again. Everything was right in the universe. And I realized going to meetings every day is not the solution. It doesn't hurt. Calling your sponsor and having the best sponsor in the world, not the solution. Doesn't hurt. But working with the new person, that's the thing that would save my ass when things get down. I was immediately connected to AA again. Now, I recognized that was the missing piece of the puzzle. But I asked myself, because why in that first 14 years, 13 years, why was it so hard to get people that I was sponsoring to do what they said they would do and do it? Because, I was a hard-nosed sponsor like my sponsors had been, and I told people what to do and made expectations of them, and then I gave them shit if they didn't do it. And I thought to myself, I've been sober a long time. And if I'm going to sponsor this man, I'm going to sponsor him the way I want to, not the way I was taught to. I'm going to be kind to this man. And if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, I don't care. I remember telling Clancy about that one time, being so mad about people. He said, well, if you're angry because they didn't do what you said, then you have a price tag on working with them. I said, what the hell you mean a price tag? I don't charge them. This is for free and for fun. He said, well, if you have an expectation, that's a price tag. You're supposed to do this for free and for fun. Well, I took that and I started thinking about what I thought and how I felt. And I started working with people in a way that I was comfortable with, which was patiently trying to help them down the path that they're capable of going down. Not the path I think they should be going down, or not get them to a level I think they should be at. Just help them at whatever level they're at, get to whatever they can do, because not everybody is capable of doing the things that I did or you did or somebody else did. So I just kind of started helping along. Funny thing is, there were no expectations after that, and I started feeling better. Well, I started sponsoring more people, and before long I got a little covey of quail around me, and we're doing our AA thing. Well, then I took a job in Mississippi, so I had to move. Funny thing, as soon as I moved to Mississippi, a little bit of depression started setting in. I'm still getting calls from the guys from Arizona, I'm getting calls from guys from Alabama, and some scattered around the country because I was traveling in my work and sponsoring. But I get over here, and all of a sudden I feel alone again. And I start feeling a little depressed, and those little thoughts of suicide start popping into my head. But I recognized them. I was going to this meeting where there wasn't a lot of newcomers, and when one showed up, 10 old-timers would attack him, And so it was hard competition to try to get a baby to work with, But I knew about this other meeting. It was a Sunday night speaker meeting, and and I only knew it because as I was traveling, I spoke there a few times, so I knew it. So when you get to the meeting, everybody had to sit, all the AA people had to sit over here, and these chairs were all empty, but you weren't allowed to sit them. So right before the meeting started, is in the basement of this treatment center, all the inmates would come down and they'd fill this side with all the treatment people, And then the speaker would get up and give a wonderful talk, and afterwards you could mingle. And that's when I walk up to a new person, I'd say, my name's Mike Bennett, it's nice to meet you. Do you have a sponsor? No, I don't have a sponsor. Well, you do now. I'm going to be your sponsor. So give me your phone number, here's my phone number, and we'd start working. And so I started doing it, and the depression was over immediately. As soon as I grabbed a new person, it was gone. So then it became kind of funny, So I'm there several years and gather up some babies, and then I moved back home to Arizona because my wife, our grandchildren are growing up here, and she doesn't want them growing up without us. So she said, I want to move home. So we moved home. As soon as I got home, a little bit of depression set in. Because it was different. A lot of the people had died or moved away. I didn't know everybody anymore, and meetings were different. And so I started laughing. I'm sponsoring a guy, and I was telling him about it, and we were laughing about it. And he said, so what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to go find a new man to work with. And so I went down to our clubhouse where the Sunday morning stag is, and I sat around in that noon meeting, and I spotted the new guys. And after the meeting, I went up to them, and I started asking them, do you have a sponsor? No, I don't have a sponsor. Okay, I'm going to be your sponsor. And bam, I was brand new again. So I've just decided that for whatever reason, there's something broken. It doesn't work when I'm alone. If I quit going to meetings, if I separate myself from you, I cannot push you out without pushing God out. I can't do it. But if I let you in, then I let God in. Isn't that an amazing thing for a guy like me to discover? So now what I am determined that I will do is always stay active working with new people, because I'm afraid if I don't, I might slip back into that depression and I might find myself thinking those things again. So AA has been so wonderful for me. Where would a guy like me go if there wasn't AA? There'd have to be like a emotionally screwed up synonymous. Right? You guys have been wonderful, and I really appreciate you listening to us, inviting us. Thank you so much, Doug, for having us up, and we'll see some of you guys around. Bye.